My name is Nora Callahan. I'm 37 years old, and I found out my entire family had been using me as a bank account from the seat of a folding chair at a church fellowship hall in Harlan, Kentucky. They'd flown me home for what they called a reunion. There were balloons. Someone had ordered a sheet cake from the Kroger bakery with my name written in blue frosting. My Aunt Bev had arranged silk flowers in mason jars down the center of the tables. My mother was wearing her best cardigan, the cream one with the pearl buttons she saves for funerals and occasions that require witnesses. I sat in that folding chair and looked at the cake and the flowers and the 43 people who had found time in their schedules to drive out on a Tuesday evening in September. And I thought, no one in this family has asked how I am in 4 years. Then my Uncle Dale stood up with a handwritten notepad and cleared his throat. And I understood exactly what kind of reunion this was. What I did in the next 20 minutes, and what I said when Dale finally finished reading from that notepad, is the reason 17 members of my family are no longer speaking to me, and the reason I sleep better than I have in a decade. Welcome to Silent Drama Stories, the channel where the quietest people in the room turn out to be holding all the cards. If someone in your life has ever mistaken your patience for permission, you are in exactly the right place. Drop a comment and tell me the last time someone confused your silence with weakness. And subscribe, because this story is going to take you somewhere you didn't see coming. Let me tell you who I was before that fellowship hall, because it matters. It always matters. I grew up in Harlan in a house with 4 bedrooms and 8 people. My parents, Roy and Shirley Callahan, my grandmother Mabel on my mother's side, my Uncle Dale and his wife June, who lived in the back addition for reasons that were always temporary and never resolved, my brother Travis, my sister Pam, and me. I was the middle child, which in this family meant I was the one nobody needed to worry about because I had always, from as far back as I can remember, simply handled things. When I was 9 years old, I organized the kitchen cabinets because nobody else could find anything. When I was 12, I sat with my grandmother during her chemo appointments because my mother said she couldn't face it and my father had a second job. When I was 16, I filed our family's tax extension because my father had lost the documents and the deadline was in 2 days, and I was the only one who thought to call the IRS and ask what to do. That's who I was, not the star. Not the one anybody pointed at and said, "Look at her." I was the one who made sure the lights stayed on while everyone else was busy being the kind of person who gets pointed at. I left Harlan at 22 on a scholarship to study accounting at the University of Louisville. My mother cried at the bus station, the theatrical kind of crying, the kind that has an audience in mind. My father shook my hand. Travis asked if he could have my bedroom. Pam was at cheerleading practice and didn't come to see me off. I built a life in Louisville that was quiet and mine, and exactly what I had worked for. I passed my CPA exam on the first attempt. I built a client roster over 12 years that included 3 mid-size businesses and a regional nonprofit. I lived in a 1-bedroom apartment with good light and a cat named Gerald who had no opinion about my family, and I loved him for it. I did not forget where I came from. I want to be precise about that, because the narrative my family constructed about me over the years was that I had abandoned them, that I had gotten above myself, that Louisville had changed me into someone cold and calculating who thought she was better than everyone back home. That narrative was convenient for them. It was also a lie they needed in order to justify what they had been doing to me quietly and consistently for 15 years. Here is what I had actually been doing for 15 years. When my father had his first cardiac event at 58, I paid his deductible. $3,200, wired in 24 hours because my mother called on a Wednesday afternoon and said they didn't have it and the hospital wanted it before the procedure. I didn't ask questions. I sent the money. When Travis's landscaping business ran into trouble in its second year, I co-signed a small business loan for $14,000. He paid it back in irregular installments over 4 years. The last $2,000 he never paid. I didn't push. When Pam's first marriage ended and she needed a deposit on an apartment, I sent $1,500 and told her she could pay it back whenever. She has never mentioned it since. When my grandmother Mabel's furnace went out in January of 2017, I drove 4 hours on a Saturday, took her to a hotel for 2 nights, arranged and paid for the furnace replacement, and drove back to Louisville on Monday morning in time for a 9 o'clock client meeting. My mother mentioned it to one person that I know of. That person was Mabel herself, and the version she was told was that the whole family had pitched in. There were other amounts, smaller ones and larger ones. The property tax shortfall in 2019. The car repair in 2020 when Dale's transmission went. The medical bill in 2021 when June had her knee replaced and they were $800 short on the secondary insurance gap. I kept a spreadsheet, the way accountants do, because numbers are how I make sense of the world. By the fall of last year, when I booked my flight home for what my mother had called a long-overdue family reunion, the spreadsheet total was $91,400. I had never said that number out loud to a single person. Not to my closest friend, Denise, who had suspected something for years. Not to my therapist, Dr. Marsh, who I had been seeing for 18 months and who had gently, repeatedly, tried to walk me toward that spreadsheet. And not to anyone in my family, who received the money the way weather is received, as something that simply happens, impersonal and expected and entirely taken for granted. I booked the flight because my mother asked me to come. She asked in October, which was early for her, and the request had a warmth to it that I was not accustomed to. She said, "Nora, we miss you." She said the whole family wants to be together. She said it's been too long. It had been too long. That part was true. I had not been back to Harlan in 3 years, not since my grandmother Mabel's funeral, which had been a blur of casseroles and relatives I barely recognized, and my mother organizing the grief into an event she could manage. I had stood at the graveside and felt the loss of the only person in that family who had ever simply looked at me and said, "I see you, the way you actually are, and I think you're something." So I said yes. I always said yes. I booked a flight for a Tuesday, which was when my mother said the gathering was planned, which should have struck me as unusual because reunions are generally held on weekends when people don't have to take time off work. I noted it the way I note a discrepancy in a ledger. A small flag that doesn't yet mean anything and gets set aside while you continue working. I packed a bag. I arranged for my neighbor Mrs. Petrakis to look after Gerald, and I flew home to Harlan, Kentucky, on a Tuesday in September with a box of chocolate bourbon balls from a shop in the Highlands, because I had been raised to never arrive empty-handed at a family gathering. The fellowship hall of Calvary Baptist Church smelled the way it had always smelled, like industrial coffee, and the lemon-scented cleaner the deacons used on the floors, and something underneath both of those smells that was the specific smell of my childhood, which I cannot name, but which hit me in the chest the moment I pushed through the double doors. My mother was the first person I saw. Shirley Callahan, 66, in her cream cardigan, standing near the refreshment table with the focused expression of someone who has been managing a staging area. She turned when she heard the doors and her face arranged itself into the welcome smile, the one with both arms coming up, the one that in photographs looks like pure maternal warmth and in person has always carried, for me, the faint quality of a performance. She hugged me and told me I looked thin, which in her language means she was not going to address the real subject yet. The room filled in over the following 20 minutes. 43 people. I counted out of professional habit. My brother Travis, 34, big as a barn door and still wearing the expression of a man who has been perpetually confused since about 1998. His wife Leanne, who brought a Jell-O salad and set it down with the deliberateness of someone completing a transaction. My sister Pam, 40, hair newly colored and earrings that suggested she had recently watched a YouTube tutorial. Pam's second husband, Greg, who shook my hand and said good to see you in the voice of a man who has no particular opinion of me in any direction. Uncle Dale and Aunt June. Approximately 30 additional Callahans, Morrows, and affiliated individuals arranged around folding tables decorated with June's silk flowers, and what I now recognized were distinctly festive touches. The balloons, the cake, the centerpieces, that suggested some degree of advance planning. Someone had planned this. That was the thing. This was not the spontaneous warmth of people who missed each other gathering in a church hall on a Tuesday. This had been organized. Logistics had been considered. My mother had called me in October, early, so I would have no excuse not to come, so the date would be anchored in my calendar before anything else could take it. I ate a piece of cake. I hugged relatives. I answered questions about Louisville in the vague, cheerful way I had learned to answer them, because the honest version of my life in Louisville, the work I found genuinely meaningful, the quiet satisfaction of a problem solved precisely, the particular pleasure of a spreadsheet that balances, none of that translated in this room. In this room, Louisville was simply the place I had gone instead of staying. I should have trusted the unease in my stomach. I am an accountant. I have spent 15 years reading numbers that tell the truth underneath the story someone else is trying to tell. That unease was data. I set it aside and ate my cake. Then my Uncle Dale stood up. Dale Morrow is 61 years old and has spent the better part of those years being the kind of man who would describe himself as the real backbone of the family while leaning on something someone else built. He is not malicious. I want to be fair about that. He is the particular type of person who has simply never been required to do the hard thing because there has always been someone nearby willing to do it for him. In our family, that someone had been, for 37 years, me. Dale stood up with a yellow legal pad in his hand and a reading glasses case tucked into the breast pocket of his flannel shirt, and he cleared his throat twice the way men clear their throats when they want the room to understand that something official is about to happen. Family, he said, we're all here because we love each other and because there are some things that need addressing. The room went the specific quiet of 43 people who already know what's coming, not the quiet of surprise. The quiet of rehearsal, of people who have been told their lines and are waiting for the scene to begin. I set down my plastic fork. Dale explained that the family was facing a number of financial challenges. He said it that way, challenges, the word people use when they want to acknowledge difficulty without accepting responsibility for it. He read from the legal pad. My parents' property tax for the coming year, $4,200, significantly increased due to a reassessment. Dale's own truck, needing a new engine, estimated at $3,800. Pam's situation, which he described as a transition period, her second word for it in that room was transition, and the first had been challenges, and I noted the pattern, requiring some temporary support for her and Greg. Travis and Leanne's oldest, my nephew Cody, who was 7 and would be needing braces within the year, and the orthodontist had given them a number that was not manageable on their current income. Dale read each item from the legal pad, in the voice of a man reading a grocery list. Then he set the pad down on the table, looked across the room directly at me, and said, "Nora, we were hoping you might be able to help us get on top of some of this. I want to stop here for a moment and tell you what the room felt like. Because I think if you have ever been the person in your family who handles things, you already know exactly what that room felt like. It felt like confirmation, not the good kind. The kind where something you have suspected for years finally shows itself to you plainly and without apology, and you understand in one cold, still moment that you had known. You had always known, and you had kept sending money anyway because the alternative was a truth you weren't yet ready to hold. I had been invited to a reunion. There was a cake with my name on it. There were silk flowers in mason jars. 43 people had come out on a Tuesday. Not to see me, to see what I would do. I sat in that folding chair, and I felt the specific interior stillness that I have learned, over many years, is the feeling that comes just before I do the work that needs doing. Not anger, not grief, not the urge to explain myself or manage anyone else's feelings. Just clarity. The same clarity I feel when I open a set of books and begin to understand what they are actually saying underneath what they have been arranged to say. My mother was watching me from the refreshment table. Pam was watching me from across the room. Travis was looking at the floor. Dale was still standing with his legal pad, in the expression of a man who believes he has made a reasonable request and is waiting for the reasonable response. I reached into my bag and took out my laptop. This was not a spontaneous decision. I want to be clear about that. I had not come to Harlan suspecting a financial ambush, but I am an accountant, and accountants bring their laptops the way doctors bring stethoscopes, as a reflex, a professional habit so embedded it does not require thought. The laptop was in the bag, and the spreadsheet was on the laptop. And the spreadsheet had been sitting on that laptop for 15 years, updated quarterly, a record of every amount I had sent this family with dates and categories, and the names of the people I had sent it to. I opened the laptop, I opened the spreadsheet, and I looked at my Uncle Dale. I told him I'd like to respond, but I wanted to make sure everyone in the room was working with accurate information first. The thing about a spreadsheet is that it doesn't have a tone. That's what makes it so powerful in a room full of people who are used to winning arguments by controlling the emotional temperature. You can call a person dramatic. You can call her cold, ungrateful, above herself, changed by Louisville into someone who thinks she's better. You cannot call a column of figures dramatic. You cannot accuse a date stamp of being ungrateful. The numbers simply sit there on the screen being exactly what they are. I turned the laptop so the room could see it. I told them I had been keeping a record. I said it simply, without apology and without emphasis, the way I would tell a client I had been keeping a record, because in my professional life a record is neither an accusation nor a threat. It is simply information that exists and has value. I walked them through it. The cardiac deductible in 2011, the co-signed loan for Travis's business, Pam's apartment deposit, the furnace, the property tax in 2019, the car repair for Dale's previous truck, the knee surgery gap for June, 17 additional items across 15 years, some of them amounts that individual family members in that room had known about, and others that had been kept between me and whoever called me in need on whichever particular afternoon. The total at the bottom of the column was $91,400. I watched 43 faces do different things with that number. My mother's hand went to her pearl buttons. Dale's legal pad lowered by about 6 inches. Travis looked up from the floor for the first time since Dale had stood up. Pam made a sound that was somewhere between a breath and the beginning of a word that she did not finish. "This is what you asked me here to add to," I said, and I kept my voice at the same register I use when I present an audit finding. Level. Precise. Without drama, because drama would have given them somewhere to go, some other thing to focus on besides the number. The number was $91,400. And I wanted everyone in the room to sit with it. My mother found her voice first. That surprised no one who knows her. She said that wasn't fair, that I was framing it, that everything on that list had been family helping family, that nobody had asked me to keep score. She said the word score like it was something shameful, like the act of recording what had happened was the real problem in the room, and not the 15 years that the recording documented. I told her that I hadn't been keeping score. I told her I had been keeping records, which is a different thing, and that the difference was significant. A score is about winning and losing. A record is about what happened. I was an accountant. I kept records. This was one of them. She said Nora. The way she said my name had 3 things inside it: a warning, a plea, the beginning of an argument she hadn't yet decided how to frame. I let the silence sit. I had learned from Dr. Marsh and from 15 years of client meetings that silence is not a void that has to be filled. Silence is a room that belongs to whoever is willing to stay in it longest. My mother has never been comfortable in silence. I have been living in it more or less my entire life. Dale tried next. He said he hadn't realized the total was so significant. He said it with the expression of a man adjusting to new information, which was, I thought, a reasonable enough response, except that the information was not new. Every individual item on that spreadsheet had been requested by someone in this room or someone connected to someone in this room. The total was the only thing that was new. The total was what happened when you stopped looking at each number in isolation and let them stand together where everyone could see them at once. I told Dale I appreciated that, and then I told him something else. I told him that I had done some additional analysis before coming home. This is the part I had not planned to use. I want to be honest about that. I had not come to Harlan intending to make a presentation. But when Dale stood up with his legal pad and I felt the room settle into its prearranged position around me, I reached the decision quickly and without uncertainty, the way I make decisions when the data is clear. I was not going to explain or defend. I was going to let the information be in the room, and I was going to let it be complete. I had done additional analysis because accountants do additional analysis. When I have a set of numbers that seem to tell one story, I look for the context that tells the rest of it. I had done that for this family's finances because the individual requests over 15 years had always come with context attached. My father's cardiac deductible had come with the understanding that my parents were stretched thin and health insurance was expensive. Dale's truck repair had come with the understanding that Dale's business needed the truck to function, and the business was the family's livelihood. Pam's apartment had come with the understanding that a woman leaving a difficult marriage needed a financial foundation to rebuild from. I had believed all of that context because the people providing it were my family, and I had extended to them the same good faith I extend to clients who tell me their situation before I look at their books. But over the previous 2 years, in the quiet of my Louisville apartment with Gerald asleep on the radiator and Dr. Marsh's voice still in my head from our Thursday sessions, I had started to look at the books. My parents' property tax, the one Dale had put first on his legal pad, had in fact been significantly reduced 2 years ago when a homestead exemption I had researched and recommended they apply for had come through. Their tax burden was lower now than it had been in 12 years. The $4,200 Dale quoted was the number before the exemption. The number after the exemption was $2,300. Someone had not updated the legal pad. Travis's landscaping business, for which I had co-signed $14,000 and absorbed the unpaid $2,000 remainder, had grossed significantly more in its most recent fiscal year than it had in the year I had co-signed. I knew this because Travis had made the mistake of sharing a business social media post at Christmas time 2 years ago that had been public and had included a photograph of 3 new commercial mowers that had not been in service when the loan was requested. Pam's transition period, as Dale had described it, had in fact been a transition toward a situation that, based on her public social media presence over the past 18 months, appeared to include a recent vacation to Gatlinburg, a kitchen renovation documented in 12 photographs, and a riding lawn mower that Pam had described in a comment as Greg's early Christmas present. I did not list these things to be cruel. I listed them because they were part of the record, and the record was what we were here to discuss. When I finished, the room was very quiet in a way that was different from the quiet before. The first quiet had been the quiet of waiting. This quiet was the quiet of people who have heard something they cannot unhear. My mother was crying. The quiet kind, not her usual kind, which told me she understood that the usual kind would not serve her in this moment. Travis was the one who surprised me. He stood up from the table where he had been sitting with his elbows on his knees and his eyes on the floor, and he said, "Nora, I knew you were keeping track." The room turned to look at him. He said it again, more quietly. "I knew you were keeping track, not specifically, but I knew. And I think," he said, "I think the rest of us knew too, and we just never let ourselves think about it directly." He sat back down. He didn't look at Dale. He didn't look at my mother. He looked at me. "I'm not proud of it," he said. "Travis and I have never been close in the way some siblings are close. The easy phone call closeness, the drop by on a Sunday closeness. We are close in the way people are close when they grew up in the same small house and survived it together without ever quite talking about the surviving. But in that folding chair in the Calvary Baptist Fellowship Hall, looking at my brother's face, I felt something that I can only describe as recognition. Not forgiveness. Not yet. Just the acknowledgement of a shared truth, spoken plainly in a room that had not been built for plainness. I nodded at him. He nodded back. Dale, who did not have Travis's capacity for self-reflection, tried one more time. He said something about family being about more than money, about how what we give each other can't be reduced to numbers on a screen. He said it with genuine conviction, which made it almost admirable and entirely enraging in equal measure. I closed my laptop. I told Dale that he was right, that family was about more than money. I said that in 15 years, the calls I had received from this family had been almost exclusively about money. I had not received calls asking how I was managing my workload, or whether Louisville felt like home, or what I was reading, or what I was afraid of. I had received calls when the deductible was due, and the truck needed work, and the apartment deposit was short. I had sent money, and I had sent it without complaint, because I believed that being useful was the same as being loved, and I had been working, slowly and with professional help, toward understanding that those were not in fact the same thing. I told them I was not going to contribute to the list on Dale's legal pad. I told them I wished them well with each item on it. And then I said the thing I had not planned to say, and that came out the way things come out when they have been waiting a very long time for the correct moment. I said that I would like very much to have a family. I said that I thought it was still possible, or I would not have flown home on a Tuesday, but that the family I wanted was one that called me when nothing was wrong, that knew something about my life beyond my credit score, that could sit in a room with me and talk about something other than what I might be able to provide. That the reunion I had thought I was flying home to was one I still wanted to have, and that I was available for it, but that I was not available to be a line item on a legal pad. I closed the laptop case. I put it in my bag. I was not leaving in anger. I want to be clear about that, because slamming doors was never my way and was not my way that evening. I was leaving the way you leave a meeting when the agenda has been covered and the next steps have been identified and there is no productive reason to stay in the room. I had said what I needed to say. The spreadsheet had said the rest. I picked up the box of chocolate bourbon balls from the table beside me because I had brought them and I was not leaving them, and I walked to my mother and set them down in front of her. I told her they were from the shop in the Highlands and that I remembered she liked them. She looked at the box and then at me, and she started to say something and didn't. I put my coat on. My grandmother Mabel had a saying that she repeated to me every year at Christmas when she pulled me aside in the kitchen while the adults were loud in the other room. She would hold my hand in her dry, warm hands, and she would say, "Nora, there are people who see you and people who use you, and the trick is learning which is which before it costs you everything." I thought about Mabel on the walk to my rental car. I thought about how she had seen me, specifically and accurately and without agenda. How she had known what I was, which was not the family bank and not the responsible one and not the one nobody had to worry about, but a person who had chosen competence as armor because the alternative was to be visibly vulnerable in a house that did not know what to do with vulnerability. I sat in the car for a moment in the parking lot of Calvary Baptist Church. Through the fellowship hall windows, I could see the shapes of my family still inside. Nobody had followed me out. I noted that without surprise and without grief, the way you note a figure in a ledger that confirms what you had already suspected. I started the car. I flew back to Louisville the next morning. Gerald was waiting at the door with the expression of a creature who has registered my absence and is prepared to be marginally warm about my return. I made coffee, I opened my laptop, I opened the spreadsheet. And for the first time in 15 years, I did something I had not done before. I did not add a row to it. I looked at the total at the bottom of the column, $91,400, and I allowed myself for 1 full minute to understand what that number represented. Not just in dollars, in choices. In the version of myself I had been building year by year, the one whose value was denominated in availability, in usefulness, in the willingness to wire money at 24 hours notice on a Wednesday. Then I saved the spreadsheet and closed it and opened a new document. At the top I wrote, things I want, not things I can provide, not things people need from me, things I want. I sat there for a long time with the cursor blinking. Then I wrote, to be called when nothing is wrong. That was the first one. There were others. I won't list them all here because some of them are private and some of them I am still figuring out. But that first one was the one that mattered, and the one I had not let myself write down in 37 years. The fallout, because there is always fallout, came in stages. Dale called 2 days after I flew home. He left a voicemail in the aggrieved tone of a man who has been informed, against his wishes, that he is not in fact the backbone of anything. He said that I had humiliated the family. He said that I had come home to rub everyone's noses in what they owed me, which was interesting because I had come home believing I was attending a reunion, and the rubbing of noses had not been my plan. But I understood that when you show a room full of people a true number, the showing tends to feel like an attack to the people who preferred the number remain unshown. I did not return Dale's call. My mother called on a Friday. Her voice had the particular texture it carries when she has been thinking about something for several days and has arrived at the version of events that she can live with. She said she understood that I was upset, which was her way of acknowledging the conversation without conceding that the thing I was upset about was real. She said that family was complicated and that we all had different perspectives on things. She said she hoped I knew how much she loved me. I told her I did know that. I said it without sarcasm because it was true. My mother loves me in the way she is capable of loving, which is a love that has significant gaps in it, but is also, underneath the gaps, genuine. Understanding the gaps does not require me to disbelieve the love. Dr. Marsh had been helping me hold both of those things at once without needing one of them to cancel the other. I told my mother that I wanted a relationship with her, that I wanted to hear from her when she was sitting in the garden and saw something funny, or when she was watching something on television and thought of me, or when it was a Tuesday and she simply wanted to talk. That I was available for all of those calls, that I was not available to be organized into a contribution to a legal pad. She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "I miss you, Nora." And I believed her. I believed that was also true. I told her I would talk to her soon, and I meant it. Pam did not call. She texted, one message on a Sunday morning, that read, "I think you really hurt some people who love you." I thought about responding and decided that I did not have a response that would open anything useful, so I left it on read, which I recognized was the first time in my life I had left a message from my family on read without the accompanying anxiety that doing so would cause irreparable damage. The anxiety did not come. That was new. Travis called 10 days after the fellowship hall. He called from his truck, which I could tell from the particular echo of cab acoustics, and he said he had been thinking about what he said in that room, and he wanted to say it again outside of that room to just me, that he had known and had looked the other way and he was not proud of it. He said it plainly, the same way he had said it in the fellowship hall, without decoration or self-justification. I asked him if he wanted to get coffee the next time I came to Harlan. He said yes. We talked for 37 minutes, which I know because I looked at the call log afterward. We talked about his kids and my cat Gerald and the new equipment he had bought for the business and a podcast about infrastructure that I had been listening to and that he had strong opinions about. At the end of the call he said, "Call me sometime, just whenever." I told him I would. I mean it. That particular branch of my family still has roots in it that might, over time, grow something real. There is one more thing I want to tell you about, because it is the part the title promises, and it is the part that I think is most true. 3 weeks after the fellowship hall, I received a letter. Not an email, a letter, handwritten on the stationery my mother keeps in the secretary desk in the living room, pale blue with a small flower at the top that I have been seeing since childhood. The letter was from my father. Roy Callahan is not a man who writes letters. He is not, in the vocabulary of feelings, a fluent speaker. He communicates in the compressed practical language of a man who grew up in eastern Kentucky in the 1950s and learned early that emotions were a weather you endured, not a country you described. His birthday cards to me over 37 years have said some variation of "Happy birthday, hope you are well-loved, Dad," and I have never in my life received from him anything longer or more specific than that. The letter was 2 pages. He wrote that he had been thinking about the reunion since I left. He wrote that he had watched me from across the fellowship hall when I opened the laptop, and he had known what was about to happen before it happened, and that he had felt, and this was the word he used, and I read it 5 times to make sure I had read it correctly, he had felt ashamed. He wrote that he had always known, without putting it into words he could say out loud, that I was the one who held things together, and that he had let me, and that he was not sure when he had decided that letting me was acceptable, but that he thought it had been a decision, even if it had been an unconscious one, and he was old enough now to call a decision a decision. He wrote that he had told my mother she needed to call me, not about money, just to talk. He wrote that he had told her that twice, and that the second time she had cried and he thought it had gotten through. He wrote, "Your grandmother Mabel used to say you were the one who saw clear. I didn't understand what she meant when you were little. I understand now." He did not write that everything was fixed or that the family was going to be different. He was too honest for that. He wrote that he was sorry, and then he wrote, specifically, what he was sorry for, and that specificity was the thing that made it real. Not a general apology for the situation, but an accounting of particular moments he had witnessed and choices he had made in those moments, and what those choices had cost. I sat at my kitchen table and read that letter in the morning light with Gerald in my lap, and I cried the way you cry when something you have been waiting for a very long time arrives, and you understand, all at once, both that you needed it and that you had been surviving without it. I wrote back. The letter I wrote back was shorter than his, because I had already said in the fellowship hall most of what needed to be said, and what remained was simpler. I wrote that I loved him. I wrote that I was not leaving, that the account was not closed, that what I had closed was a different kind of account entirely, the one where I deposited usefulness and withdrew nothing, and called that love. I wrote that I wanted to find out what we could be to each other outside of that transaction. I signed it, your daughter. It has been 7 months since the Calvary Baptist Fellowship Hall. Dale still has not spoken to me, which I have made my peace with. Dale's legal pad, and I have nothing further to discuss. Pam and I are in a place that I would describe as paused. The door is not locked, but it is not open. I am not forcing it in either direction. My parents and I talk on the phone, my mother on Tuesday evenings, which she started because I told her to call me on Tuesdays when nothing was wrong, and apparently that stuck, and my father on occasional Sunday mornings from his chair in the living room with the television on low. The calls are not long, and they are not unburdened. There is still weight in the silences and history in the pauses, but they are real. They are the most real conversations I have had with my parents in 20 years. Travis and I got that coffee in December. We are scheduled for another one in the spring. I still see Dr. Marsh on Thursdays. We have moved from the spreadsheet to what she calls the infrastructure underneath the spreadsheet, which is a longer and more complicated project, but one I find, to my own surprise, that I am genuinely interested in. It turns out that understanding yourself is not entirely unlike auditing a set of books. You have to follow the numbers all the way back to the original entry, find the moment when the recording began, and understand what assumptions were built into the system before you can understand what the system has been producing ever since. The $91,400 is gone. I have accepted that, not with joy, but with the specific equanimity of someone who has done a proper inventory and understands what the loss actually consists of. It is not just money. It is also 15 years of a particular story I was telling myself, the one where being necessary was the same as being seen, where providing was the same as belonging, where the check I sent on a Wednesday afternoon was a kind of love that would be returned to me in kind eventually if I just kept sending it. That story cost $91,400. As Dr. Marsh pointed out with her characteristic dry precision, I've paid more for less useful education. Gerald is asleep on the radiator. The spreadsheet has not been opened in 7 months. The new document, the one that starts with things I want, has 7 items on it now. The first one is still, to be called when nothing is wrong. My phone rang on a Wednesday in March. My mother's name on the screen. It was 2 in the afternoon, not a crisis hour, not the end of the month when bills come due. I answered. She said, I was just sitting in the garden and a cardinal came and sat on the feeder for about 10 minutes, and I thought of you because you always liked cardinals when you were small. I sat down at my kitchen table. I told her I still liked cardinals. We talked for 40 minutes. She did not mention money. I did not mention the spreadsheet. She told me about the garden, and I told her about a case I was working on, and she laughed at something I said about a client, and the laugh was real, the unperformative kind, the kind that happens because something was actually funny. When we hung up, I sat for a moment with the phone in my hand. This is what I learned from a folding chair in a fellowship hall in Harlan, Kentucky, from a yellow legal pad and a spreadsheet and a letter written on pale blue stationery by a man who had never written 2 pages about anything in his life. The people who reduce you to your usefulness are often the people who are afraid of you in your full size. And the most disorienting thing you can do to a room that has decided what you are worth is to stand up inside it and be worth something different. I did not do it loudly. I did not do it with a speech or a scene or a slammed door. I did it with a laptop and 15 years of careful numbers and a willingness to sit in the silence after the numbers spoke and let them mean what they meant. That's the whole thing. That's all it took. If you are the person in your family who handles things, who sends the money, who manages the feelings, who flies home on a Tuesday in September because someone asked you to, I want you to hear this. Keeping records is not the same as keeping score. And the day you let the numbers be in the room is not the day you give up on your family. It might be the day your family finally gets to meet you. That's my story. If you are somewhere in the middle of a version of it, subscribe because you are going to want to stay for what comes next. Drop a comment and tell me whether you would have opened the laptop. I will read every single one.